Hello, good afternoon from me. I understood that the general setup of this event is that you will have more technical talks first, and then like more high-level, entertaining talks given by guys like me and Tõnis like later on. So this is now the introduction of the dessert for all of you. I'm not going to show any formulae, so I'm going to tell a little bit on a higher level. Why do we need all of this? Do we need all of this in the first place? And perhaps when? I don't know when. So this I can tell you instantly. I have no idea when this thing is going to happen. You can ask Tõnis. Well, he's from the state. But anyway, let's start from like general philosophical questions. So why do we need such a thing as a state in the first place? So there is lots of history books written on this topic. But let me assume the approach where the state is needed so that the citizens could be provided with some services. So there are some socialized services that we all find useful, like education or healthcare or public safety. And all of this is something that one single person probably can't really take on that well. So we need like the whole society around us, and at some level we call this society a state. And when we already have these services, then people start having expectations about these services. So we want these services to be available to those who need these, like think of healthcare, for example. Every once in a while you need an emergency room or something, who need them and when they need them. So this is like needs, we need to put some assumptions, some restrictions, some expectations on these services. And where does this E come into the play is that it turns out that making things more digital helps them to make more efficient or make them more available, for example. So we had this COVID thing a few years ago, and we converted all our education to E, and it at least made it somehow possible to have some form of education throughout this year. So I view this as one way of making the state services more available to people, more accessible, if you will. Once you start putting up services to the public, this public will expect some requirements or some properties to hold. So, for instance, the services should be available to only those entitled to them. Like, think of social welfare, for example. We don't want everyone to live on social welfare, only the people who really need it. The services should be fair. So if there is like pensions, for example, so there is a certain pot of resources, so you should distribute that fairly as you can, and also preferably you should be accountable in your fairness. So it's not just enough for the state to be fair, the state also perhaps needs to prove that it was fair, for example. Of course, there are privacy things. So in order to provide the services like healthcare, for example, you need to collect data about people's medical states. And this information should be handled in a privacy-respecting manner. And there are many more of requirements like this. I put it here like include your favorite requirements here. So whatever a public service provides you, you probably want this service to satisfy some properties, so please list your properties here. And such requirements are often summarized under the common notion of security. Me, myself, I don't particularly like the term security. It's too generic, too broad. Whenever it's used, it's typically used wrongly. So if you can, don't use the term secure. Please use privacy preserving or confidential or authentic or all those are already much better than just generically secure. But these are some of the examples what people expect from security properties. And where does cryptography come in? So cryptography is just one way of handling security requirements. It's not by far the only one. There are organizational approaches, physical approaches, and so on. But cryptography is one of them. And we have to keep that in mind when designing these public services. So if we have to be prepared for certain problems, then perhaps cryptography is not the only approach that we can take to satisfy some requirements. Yeah, for example, confidentiality of information we typically handle via key exchange and encryption. Authenticity and integrity we tend to provide with digital signatures. There are more advanced cryptographic techniques like accountability is sometimes achieved via something called zero-knowledge proofs, and so on. So there are several possible things, possible tricks that you may take. Yes, so I think a few weeks ago, my good colleague Arne, I think whom you saw also this morning, asked me the question, well, but what does it actually take to break these cryptographic algorithms? So how long would it actually take if you would have a cryptographic algorithm and you would have a quantum computer? How long would it take for this quantum computer to break this crypto algorithm? And the important thing to note is that it doesn't happen like in an instant. So it will also take some time. And well, how much depends on who you ask and when you ask. So for instance, in 2019, there was a paper published that claimed that 2 kilobit RSA, which we can consider like a standard test bed for quantum crypto breaking, can do it in 8 hours. Of course, the guys didn't have access to sufficiently large quantum computer. They just did some pen and paper computations. Well, 4 years later, in 2023, there was another paper that claimed that, well, these guys were a bit too optimistic. So 8 hours probably is not going to be enough. So under like ideal conditions, if my reading of this paper is correct, they say that RSA 2K would break in about 100 days. Under more realistic conditions, it could take years, perhaps even decades. Don't get me wrong, it's still much, much shorter than it would take breaking RSA with a classical computer. It would take like millions of years, something with the classical computers. It would still be much, much faster. But my point is that there's still some significant amount of time involved. So it's not like you will break it in a blink of an eye. It's going to take you years, something like this. Would be a safe assumption. According to our present knowledge, of course, this is something that might be improved in future. This is only, yeah, only a guess for the time being, but let's take this guess, and I think we can be pretty sure that the quantum computers will not work in an instant in the future either. So it's at least going to take hours or days or years, something like that. Another good question is, how much would it cost? And here the questions are even more vague. So I found a paper also from last year, where the authors claim that achieving something that's called quantum advantage would cost about $1 million. So what is exactly quantum advantage, or how do you exactly say that now we achieve this, is also still a little bit vague. And everybody has their own definition of it. Essentially, what people mean is that performing a computation that is not possible with classical computers. And I guess this links to Jan's presentation, where he said that IBM has proposed a bonus if you can come up with a computer and prove that you did something that classical computers can't. So, if I read correctly, they proposed 5 million or something. So it's an order of magnitude around there. So if you have $1 million to spare, you can prove that the result is a quantum advantage. You get 5 million from IBM. So you're like 4 million in benefits. So good business, I guess, if you're into business of building quantum computers. So, but again, and of course, this is just the bare minimal quantum advantage. So from bare minimal quantum advantage to breaking RSA 2K, it's still like light years. So that's going to probably be more expensive. So we learned that breaking your crypto systems doesn't just take time, it also takes money. And now we come to risk analysis, where when we start asking ourselves, do we need to fear quantum computers? So in order to understand whether your application is endangered by a quantum computer, you would probably need to think a little bit about your application or your service that you're providing. So you would need to ask questions like, for how long does your application need to withstand the attack? So it's not the case that every conceivable application needs to stay secure like for years or for decades. There are pretty short-lived applications. So for these, perhaps quantum computer is not a threat. Another good question to ask is, how much can the attacker gain from attacking you? So what's the attacker motivation? If they break your signature, well, how much can they achieve with it? It probably depends on who you are. So if you're a chairman of a multinational, multi-billion corporation, then it's probably more expensive than breaking even my signature key, for example. And of course, relating to these two previous questions, or two previous slides, what are the resources available for the attacker? So you know he needs some time to break this algorithm, and perhaps even more importantly, he needs money, because running these quantum computers is not cheap at all. It's dirt expensive, so you will have to cool your thing down to like 20 millikelvins or things like that, because all temperature fluctuations kill your qubits instantly. And it's unbelievably expensive to do this. I think Jan showed you a quantum computer here. So that's basically a big freezer. So the quantum chip is like this big, and everything else is a freezer. And you can go home and think, well, how do you cool things down to 20 millikelvins? What are the substances that you will use to transport heat away from these things? That's a good question. Think about it. Now, so let's do some exercises with some potential application scenarios. So authentication, for example. You authenticate yourself to a web bank or whatever service. So authentication typically happens for one session and for a limited time. So this is one of the examples of short-lived services, in a way. Think of authentication as a separate service. And breaking your authentication key, well, the attacker can authenticate you as to some services, but I mean, likely perhaps this benefit that the attacker gains from authenticating as you, like all these gains are relatively small. Well, it again depends on who you are, but these are like relatively low bonus attacks for the attacker. Also, authentication keys can be revoked quite easily. So you revoke your public key, and that's it. So if it turns out that RSA is broken, we revoke all your RSA public key certificates, and nobody can authenticate to the service anymore. So it's like you pull the lever, and you're like instantly secured from future attacks. So this is again a bonus of a short-lived application scenario. So perhaps in many scenarios, using pre-quantum authentication may actually be quite okay. So if the price or the bonus that the attacker gets is, for instance, less than this $1 million or $5 million that he needs to spend. Okay, signatures. Signatures are trickier because signatures have long-term security requirements. So you take like some responsibilities to yourself. You promise to pay back the bank loan for the next 30 years. And you have used these signatures to sign the loan agreement. So the bank wants the signatures to be okay for 30 years. So now you will need to be like more careful. Well, luckily, the problem of compromising the public signatures keys has been there also for pre-quantum applications, right? So key compromise is nothing new. So we've known about the possibility for years, for decades, and we've taken like steps, precautionary steps for that, timestamping being one of them. So if you're using good enough timestamping, that will not be broken by a quantum computer. So that's a separate story. But we do know how to do things like this. Then you actually don't need to worry, at least up till to the point where you will have sufficiently powerful quantum computer. Of course, after the point of emergence of sufficiently powerful quantum computer, you will need to start thinking. So if I'm now going to sign something, and you would need to ask, what is the value of your signature? So if the value of your signature is less than the cost of breaking your key, or even let's say the combined value of all your potential signatures is less than the cost of breaking your signature key, then I think it's actually okay to use pre-quantum signatures. Of course, you would need to factor in future value of your signature, which may be tricky. But what I'm saying is that there may be application areas where using post-quantum or pre-quantum signatures is okay even after quantum computers emerge. You need to compute. And of course, if it turns out that the attacker has more to gain from breaking your signature key than the cost of actually breaking it, then you will need to use post-quantum signatures. The third public key application scenario is encryption. And here you will need to ask about the what I call a confidentiality horizon of your data, of your information. If you're protecting information, you will need to ask yourself, for how long does this information need to stay secret? So for some secrets, they're like legally set dates. These things have to stay secret for 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, something like that. So, or even if it doesn't come from legislation, you may want to perform like analysis on type of data that you handle. Perhaps you discover that some of this data needs to stay confidential for now, but next year, who cares? So there's lots of these sorts of data. So, and if your confidentiality horizon is less than the time that it would take to break the encryption key, then it might actually be okay to use pre-quantum encryption. And of course, the other thing you need to ask about is the value. What is the value of this information? And information may have very different value. If your value of encrypted information is less than the cost of breaking the encryption key, then you can also use pre-quantum cryptography. Otherwise, you need to start using post-quantum cryptography. Of course, this sort of risk analysis comes with challenges. The main challenge being that lots of this computation is based on partial data, which you don't have today. You don't yet know how much it's going to cost to build a computer, how much it's going to cost to run this computer, how long does it run, and perhaps even more importantly, you don't always know the future value of all your signatures combined. Perhaps you will become an important person or something, and the value of your signature goes up instantly. So what this means is sometimes it may be justified to convert to post-quantum crypto just in case. And my understanding is that this is exactly what is happening right now. So as we don't know the future value of all the signatures, potentially of everyone here, and we still want to provide a public key infrastructure as a service, then just in case, we are right now preparing for this post-quantum era, let's put it this way. So I guess we've got nothing better to do, since the information that we work under is still very limited and comes with a very high margin of error. So we don't know when this quantum computer, the quantum computer will be ready in 15 years, as they have been saying for the last 25 years. So this is as good as an estimate as we can get, right? Right, and I think the last thing I wanted to tell you, or I wanted you to think about, is ecosystems. This now concerns the issue of transition. So when you start building solutions like again Jan was presenting, where you start, for instance, combining together different crypto systems preparing for the quantum computers era, you will perhaps some of the applications that you're having or you're building are going to be easier to convert than others. And for me, one specific distinction here is whether the ecosystem is open or closed. And what I mean by this is whether you, when you're building a service, are responsible for all the main components of the service, or do you want to interface also your service to other people's components abroad, built by other people, other companies, whatever. So yeah, and I brought here some of the examples. So let's say this CDOC that we're using in Estonia to send encrypted messages, encrypted email attachments, if you will, is a relatively closed ecosystem. So all these components that we use, the DigiDoc application software to encrypt and to also decrypt using the ID card, for example, right now, they're all more or less under our control. So this means that this sort of an ecosystem would be relatively easy to convert. So we can ourselves define what is the date when we convert. We convert all our own customers, who typically are like more or less our own people. It's going to take a few months, perhaps a year, perhaps 2, but we can still pretty reasonably manage this. PKI, being public infrastructure, on the other hand, is an example of a very open ecosystem. So there are like many software components, all your browsers, all your websites need to get the certificates from somewhere, your applications need to interface with them. And I don't frankly imagine how are you going to convert like the whole international PKI infrastructure. It's going to be a disaster. But apparently Google is already doing this, right? So Chrome is already supporting post-quantum key exchange for a few major releases. So perhaps that's a start. But it's expect bumps on the road. And last but not least, I put here the internet voting system, which is a very interesting piece of infrastructure. It contains many components, uses crypto on very many levels. And this has both subparts. It has an open ecosystem where we rely on the PKI, essentially, the Estonian PKI for EID here. And again, as also perhaps Jan and my previous colleagues told you, you will need a lot of things to happen before you can upgrade that one. For instance, if you want to upgrade your ID cards, you will need the vendors who are ready to provide you with such ID cards, for example. Whereas the encryption part of the IBXV internet voting system that we use is completely under our control. So we define what crypto system do we use. We, in Estonia, write all the applications for it, implementations, and this part is going to be much easier to upgrade. So, just a thought for all of you, and I guess this is my last slide. Yes, thank you.
Yes, so you're also nice on time today. Yeah, it wasn't the plan that we will have the funny talks in the second half after the lunch, but it turned out the best, so I will just take credit for it. Do you have questions? Yes, Mr. Paljak.
So, thank you for the talk. Really interesting. As it was supposed to be a funny talk, there's also a funny question. Will the post-quantum E-system or E-state be deployed on IP version 4 or 6?
Oh, no,
IPv4 or 6?
I have no idea, sorry.
So which comes earlier? Basically, that's the question.
I have no idea. Sorry about that.
The same Cloudflare radar that shows you post-quantum deployments has a sort of 50-50 between V4 and V6 right now. So IPv6 is more popular than post-quantum, but it has had much more time to get there. More questions? Yes, please.
May I ask if security is a priority for the state? So, for what your opinion, how much control should state have over this technology?
Very nice.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes, as I started, so the idea of the state is to provide services, right? So the state should take care about these things as much as it needed to provide these services and to guarantee their expected properties, right? So well, there are certain things that the state can do. The state can foster, for instance, transition in these ecosystems that are under the state's control, for example. So yeah, this post-quantum CDOC we can build now if we want. Starting post-quantum transition to PKI, if we rely on hardware components like HSMs for CA key management and chip cards to handle the client-side operations, it's a challenge. So what we can do, we can talk to the vendors, we can ask when would it make sense for call for a procurement, for instance. These sorts of things you can do today. But they're like preparatory actions, and you of course have to do this. Because when the clock starts ticking for everyone at the same time, if the quantum computer emerges. So preparatory actions is now, I guess, the best that you can do. I'm happy to see that the Estonian state does this, Czech state does this. I guess every reasonable state does this to some extent.
Well, European Commission is
European
putting tens of
Commission
millions on this, so apparently
pushing this,
preparatory actions is where we are. More questions? Yes, there.
There's an interesting observation about open and closed systems. What do you think about NIST competitions, open source development, open source collaboration?
Yes, of course. so the history of cryptography knows many examples where design principles or even whole descriptions of crypto systems have been closed, and most of them ended not so well. So NIST realizes this very well. And this is a reason why they, for a few decades already now, are running very open competitions. So AES competition was very nicely open, SHA-3 competition was very nicely open, and they're continuing their practice with the current post-quantum. So they've realized that even if they want to develop some closed crypto systems, it comes with a very high risk, because not that many eyes will have been looking at that. So I guess this is a reason why they're so much behind the open development. And I'm a cryptographer, I can only applaud. Yes, for me, this is the way to go.
Yes, so everybody needs friends, and cryptographers also need friends. So thank you. There's a 20-minute coffee break now. We thank Jan again. And
Thank you.
in 20 minutes, we will hear from governmental representatives from Estonia and the Czech Republic. So people whose job title is government authority, who get paid by the government, they will talk to us about how this thing will happen in the...
Take all the responsibility.
Jan, please. Anyway, coffee break, please.